tell me the story behind the name the Bun. So what's the story behind it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nickname that I've had since I was young, since maybe a teen.
Mm-hmm.
One of the high school names that you get, and it came about. I I'm a lifelong skateboarder. Been skateboarding
Okay.
since I was, I don't know, 4 or 5, something like that, and I still skateboard to this day. But one of the things that happens in skateboarding is people, for some reason, everyone gets a nickname. No one, and I've seen this to be the case around the world with skateboard culture everywhere. People kind of give each other names, and it's not on purpose. It's not conscious. It just something that happens. It's a phenomena in that culture. So anyhow, one of my skateboarding friends in high school, recognized that I was always begging for money at lunchtime or during breaks between classes. 10 cents here, 25 cents there. And it was always to get a honey bun, which is this sort of like donut, or it's like a pastry type of a doughy bun type of thing that is, uh, it's sweet, and it's got uh, like a syrup on it and all this kind of stuff. And I loved them, and I couldn't get enough of them. And I was just always scrounging for buns. And so he just started calling me the Bun. And of course, that rippled through the whole skateboard community and into other parts of my life. So I got into music through skateboarding. Skateboarding was music was very prominent in the skateboarding culture, specifically at the time, like punk rock music. We would read these magazines, skateboard magazines, one of them specifically called Thrasher magazine, and it had a section in it um, of music reviews and all these sorts of things. And it was always these like really audacious looking covers, and the reviews associated with it would describe these really wild and crazy kinds of music. And we're like, what is this? And so we'd order the music, and so I got into music through that and started bands, started playing, various instruments, and started in bands, and here we are today.
Nice.
Yeah.
Lovely story. Because I know there's always a story behind nicknames. And I want to really know more about the story about behind the bun. It's very interesting, very, very fun. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a simple one, but it's one that stuck. For some reason, skateboarders, they love nicknames. And there's a number of skateboarders still to this day that I've known for 20 years, maybe longer. I don't know what their actual given names are. There's a guy named Mortal, and they just call him Mortal. I don't know what his actual name is. Another guy I know named Outdoor. And these are people that I've known for a long time. We don't hang out every day or every week, but I see them frequently enough. I have no idea what their actual real names are. Never even thought to ask.
Right,
So
right.
there's many people that know me as the Bun, have no idea that Scott is a person.
Amazing. Now
Yeah.
they know more. What's the story behind the bun? All
Today's
right.
the day.
Yeah. We finally revealed it, guys.
Yeah. Do you have a
Sorry.
nickname?
Uh, just April or Dawn or yeah, that's basically it. I just nothing. The story behind my name though is I'm born on the dawn of April, on the month of
Amazing.
April, so it's April Dawn. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
but I
has
like the story of yours better because
Amazing.
right. Okay, so looking back when you're a kid, you got this nickname and everything, but back then, did you imagine yourself being in the music industry when you grow up?
Yes. Interesting, because on one hand, yes, and the other, no. So I knew very early that music was the thing for me, and I had like a a strong desire for it early on. And in particularly, so there, I guess there's two steps to it, but like I think everybody who gets into music, there was that genesis period, that genesis point where um, there was an instrument that they saw someone play or heard someone play, and they're like, "What's that?" And they just connect with an instrument. Could be the piano, a saxophone, a guitar, whatever. For me, it was guitar, and it was my uncle, specifically my uncle Kevin, who is a world famous session musician these days, but then he was just a child, but he was playing guitar, and he played something very specific. I'd seen him play many times, but he played something specific with my uncle Bill in their parents' living room, in my grandparents' living room, and he played something on an electric guitar that was not plugged in. uh it was just acoustic in the room, in the living room, and I was like, wow. And it was the way that it was played, and that was the moment forever in my life that kind of led me into really wanting to do music. But there's sort of a second part to it, and it comes from my uncle Kevin once again. But I was talking to him on the phone, and at this point he had moved away to this city. I live in Toronto, Canada right now, and it's Canada's biggest city, and it's where you go if you want opportunity in Canada. And arguably the only step from here is like New York or LA in the United States. Arguably these days you can make a career anywhere because of the internet, but I digress. Anyhow, I was talking to him on the phone. He was living here. He was, getting going with his music career. And I was asking him all kinds of questions about guitar amplifiers and all these sorts of things because I was starting to really get into it. And he was talking about recording and how he was recording songs at home in his bedroom. I was like, what? Describe it to me. Like, tell me more about this recording in your bedroom. What? I thought you had to go to some facility, where there was these gatekeepers, and this magical equipment. He's like, no, I just have a 4-track, and this is way before computers. This is, on a cassette tape. I don't have any out right now, but most people, I think, still know what a cassette tape looks like. But it was on cassette tape. It was 4 tracks. And he described it to me. I was like, that sounds like magic, because it was this opportunity to like fully express yourself, this opportunity to make your story in sound, and I was just, it blew my mind. And at that moment, I knew that that's what I wanted to do, because it also represented that it was an opportunity to kind of do it all yourself. And I had this dream of like playing all the instruments and making my own songs. And at that point, I didn't have the ability, but I was like, I think it's possible. And that's what I ended up doing with my life.
Amazing. Because
Yeah.
I've always believed that if you are inclined to music, there's always that one person, one moment that really ignited your passion for music. Somewhere in your past, somewhere in your childhood, there's always that one person, one moment. So
Yeah.
now it's your uncle. Got it.
Yeah. It's, having an example, I
Mhm.
think is kind of really important. I can't imagine reaching for something like that um, without having someone like that close. I'm sure it happens, but yeah, you know, I remember, it's sort of a different branch of music, of my music history, is I had already started playing some guitar, and I was terrible at it, but I had a guitar and I knew how to use it a little bit. And a friend of mine who I skateboarded with, Keith Body is his name. He We were at my house skateboarding. I had a ramp in my backyard, and we were done with that. And he was, I don't know, we were getting water or going to the bathroom, I don't know, something, getting ready to kind of depart. He's like, "Oh, wow, you have a guitar." I'm like, "Yes." He's like, "Do you know how to use it? I'm like, yeah, like this. He's like, can you show me something? And I showed him something and he could immediately do it, which was interesting because it took me a really long time to just coordinate my fingers to just grip the guitar. And I was like, wow, you should do this because you're great. You just have a natural inclination towards it. And he's like, wow, really? I'm like, yeah. So he went home, he told his parents, he's like, I want to play guitar. And within a week or 2 weeks, he knew all of the songs of all of the bands that we were listening to and more. He couldn't get enough, and he just could, had this natural ability towards it. And to this day, he's a career musician, and he's phenomenal guitar player. And so, yeah, it's interesting. Like people pick up on, especially when it's a person within their fold, a person within their life, and you pick up on that and you have that opportunity to kind of get close to it. I think it really propels you. Of course, you can see like your idol on television or something like that and be like, oh, wow, that looks exciting. I want to do that. But I think it's different. Maybe not. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah. Well, you actually already answered my next question,
Yeah.
which is like, who's this one person that you've always looked up to when it comes to music? So that's Uncle Bill. But
Yeah.
someone famous back then when you were a kid. Is there someone like a band or a musician?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
It's interesting. Like I have never really had any heroes. I've never had that. Like a lot of people, they have like a hero, a person that they really look up to. And I've never really had that in the same way. I'm a little bit, I'm neurodivergent in a bunch of different ways, I guess, but that's another story. But I kind of look at the world a little bit differently. And so I don't see heroes, but I do see things that are interesting to me, like a spectacle. I'm like, wow, that's really like visually interesting, sonically interesting, just interesting. And I want to get inside of that idea. And for me, really young, that was Kiss, this band Kiss. And it's kind of funny to think about now because I don't know, I think Kiss is kind of funny, but I could see as a 4-year-old, it's like, wow, like they had all the makeup back then. I don't know if you know who Kiss is. Yeah, maybe. But they had all the makeup and they had all the fire and the costumes and all that kind of stuff. And as a 4-year-old, you're like, what is this? This is insane. And I just wanted to know more. It was mysterious, I guess. And I wanted to know what it was. Is it real? Like, do these people just walk around in the daytime like this? The pictures of the photographs of their stages and all this stuff are just over the top. I'm like, what? This is not what anything I understand. So there is definitely that kind of thing. But musically, I never really had a hero. I was always looking for I had this idea of a sound in my head, and it wasn't until I found the punk rock stuff with skateboarding, and that led into like heavy metal and like various branches of this more tactile music, like rough music that was like kind of rough around the edges and you could feel it, not to say that you can't feel other kinds of music, but yeah, it's interesting. There was this spectacle of Kiss, and I was super curious about it, but I didn't really care about their music. but I think it had a part to play in forming my idea about performance and being an artist, being a music artist, and all that kind of stuff.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah, I know Kiss. Yeah. Yeah, and all the makeup and stuff. Yeah. So that probably led to your inclination towards the genre that you're in now.
Yeah, I think so. It was guitars and it was loud and all that kind of stuff. But it really, the first time I remember the first time I ever heard like, the punk rock kind of sound, and particularly East Coast USA, I guess also West Coast. So the two bands from the USA at the time were Minor Threat and Black Flag. And Minor Threat was the East Coast, Eastern Seaboard USA, and Black Flag was Western Seaboard, like LA or area. But they were friends, and when they would tour, they would kind of do things together. And Henry Rollins, who ended up in Black Flag as the vocalist, he was from DC originally, and he was friends with Ian MacKaye from Minor Threat. Anyway, I digress. So it was all connected, but it was when I heard that, I was like, what is this sound? And my ears just like really went up. I was intrigued by the kind of rock sound from previous, but it wasn't until I heard that where I was like, I have to do this. This is the thing. And then that led into heavy metal. This was probably 1980, I don't know, 1983, 84, something like that. And all those things were really kind of proliferating through Western culture, like punk, the punk rock thing, the Western punk rock thing, is quite a few years, I think, after the England, the Sex Pistols and all that. I think that stuff happened in the 70s. But yeah, in the 80s, early 80s, this punk rock thing was happening, and this heavy metal thing was happening, specifically thrash metal, which was a very punk influenced heavy metal sound. And it was happening in the Bay Area of San Francisco. And I was, the punk rock thing led to that. And I was like, all of this is amazing.
Amazing. Yeah. There's always like these artists that you like really make a part of the genre that you're in now. So
yeah,
that makes sense. Okay. Now, I was reading about you, and this phrase hit me. I want to know more about how you interpret this phrase. Heavy without metal. Tell me about that.
Well, actually, what we were just talking about in terms of the punk rock leading into the heavy metal thing kind of is the inroads into that conversation. And my interest in this sort of rougher around the edges kind of sound comes from the punk rock thing more. And there's a whole bunch of things about heavy metal that is really interesting to me, and all of the splinterings of the heavy metal genre, because it's, these days things are fragmented into these micro genres, and there's probably 100 or so genres that make up heavy metal. And same thing with punk rock, to be honest. But overall, the thing that drives heavy metal or metal oriented things, the metal aesthetic, the metal attitude, the metal perspective, I don't really identify with it. And there's a lot of things that I might even have a negative opinion of from an artistic point of view and an aesthetics point of view. And I'm not trying to dissuade anybody else from their interest in those kinds of sounds or those kinds of genres. There's a lot of things from heavy metal that I find aesthetically interesting, artistically interesting, technically interesting. But I don't wrap the culture. I don't identify with the culture, I think, is maybe the best way to think about it. I come from the whole punk rock thing, and the various branches of punk rock, particularly where it went in the 90s, this sort of DIY 90s, like post-punk hardcore kind of thing happened. And it's a very sort of esoteric era of the hardcore punk rock scene. And things really branched out, and it took on a lot more influences from other kinds of music, but it was still motivated and propelled by this punk rock frame of mind, this DIY, like do it yourself kind kind of attitude. Wait for nothing, no gatekeepers, that kind of thinking. Not to say that I identify completely with all of the philosophies that drive all of that. I think about it my own way now, but when I was young, I was all about all of it. But yeah, the metal thing, I don't identify with the metal culture. So, but there's a lot of things in metal that are useful or interesting, but overall, I'm more on the punk rock side of things than I am on the heavy metal side of things.
Got it. That makes perfect
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. That phrase really caught me. This is unique, heavy without metal. I've always liked hearing heavy metal, but there's
Yeah.
something about this, something unique about this. All right. Now, well, there's pretty much a lot of difference in, development progress in the music industry from then till now. With what you see right now in the music industry, what's that one thing that you want to change given the chance?
Change about the industry itself?
Yes,
Right.
about the industry itself.
I think it's the fact that the large organizations, the major labels, have so much influence over how everybody else does business. And that's something that was very significantly offset by the internet. And for a while, it was the Wild West, and nobody had control over anything. But in recent years, the major labels have once again kind of like descended with their talons into the meat of the independent artist and are carrying chunks of it away with them. Particularly in the area of the streaming services. So, Spotify, Apple Music, all that kind of stuff. YouTube and YouTube Music seem to be still like there's a lot of freedom there. And perhaps that will change, that will become more as we go on, where the artist is everything on YouTube and YouTube Music. And the major labels have a hard time kind of clamping that down and controlling it and being first. But with Spotify and stuff like that, yeah, it's interesting how it became, you have this amazing library of anything you can listen to, and people still opt in to only listen to the thing with the biggest marketing budget. And they're not, I understand that the individual isn't that interested in music. They just want to jam, like the hot summer jam to pump to that their friends also like. And I get that. Not everybody is a music nerd. But for the music nerds, you get this machine kind of in the way of finding all the other stuff. There's this company called, or not company, but this platform called Bandcamp, which you may or may not be aware of. But Bandcamp, it started as a independent upstart and has since been bought and sold a few times. It's on its second acquisition cycle right now. I can't remember. I think Song Trader is the company that purchased it. And previous to that was Epic Games, I believe. Anyway, it's gone through a few acquisitions, and it's potentially in peril of becoming not what it once was. But what it once was this amazing platform for discovery of just music. Like if you're a music nerd and you are not interested in the biggest marketing budget, you're just like, I just want cool jams. I want to find the most bleeding edge music in whatever genre. Bandcamp would be the place to do that. And it still is that place. But I feel as though for a minute, the Epic Games acquisition of that platform looked like it was a potential to grow that into something much bigger, but I don't think they had the vision for it. I don't think Epic Games had the understanding either of what the platform really was. And Song Trader looks like they are more in line with the regular DSPs, the regular distribution platforms like CD Baby and I don't know, TuneCore and stuff like that. There's DistroKid, but that's another thing. They do the same thing, but they're a little bit more progressive. I wish DistroKid would have acquired Bandcamp. That would have been great. But yeah, we're in this weird time where the majors still have figured out a way to kind of get in the way of awesome music and control things. And it's just like, I'm not trying to be a bummer or anything like that, but does anyone really care about Dua Lipa? Like maybe, but like, I don't think you have like hardcore music fans. I think it's like a cultural phenomenon that drives that kind of stuff. Not to say that that artist can't sing or doesn't have any talent. I'm sure they do, but it's the way that it's sort of built and packaged. I'm like, I don't know if that's enriching our world. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm just short-sighted, but I just use that artist as it could be Taylor Swift, it could be whatever. And a lot of people probably hate on me because there's like Swift Nation and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. Is that what music's about? Maybe.
You know what? That hit me, what you just said about, the current status in the music industry, because yeah, it makes sense that the modernization that we have right now should be helping the artists be able to reach out to people more, get their music out there even more. But because of the big ones, it's kind of like shadowing them again, and the freedom of the online platforms actually becoming useless if that's the case. It's like the online platform should be a way for each artist to have a fair chance at having a shot at it, getting their music out there.
Yeah, I think the fair chance component really has to do with the listener. Like, encourage the listeners to make their own decisions, and let the listeners make their own decisions. And of course, as listeners, we always have that opportunity. I'm not trying to say that we're powerless or whatever, but when it comes to the music market, when it comes to any market, the markets are heavily manipulated through marketing and all these sorts of things. And through gatekeeping, attempting to manipulate access. And I think maybe that part is the grossest part about any industry, is the attempt to manipulate access rather than just let people decide. Of course, from a business perspective, and when it comes to the bottom line, it's like, we got to pay our bills. We've built this multi-million-dollar platform, and we need to appease our shareholders and pay our bills. And so it becomes more about continued growth and continuing to exist than it does about the proliferation of a culture, proliferation of ideas, which is the most amazing part about music and art in general. So yeah, the the major labels, like, get out of my way.
Very, very interesting. Like, I mean, a lot of artists would totally agree about that. Like,
Yeah.
it's really the situation right now. So
Yeah.
totally agree with that. I mean, the way you express yourself through your music, and like how I'm hearing you right now, how passionate you are with what you do, I'm sure you're getting this from a huge inspiration. So where do you get your inspiration in creating music from?
Interesting. Yeah. I I think I'm a little bit different that way in terms of that I don't really rely on inspiration. So occasionally I am inspired, of course. And I think that's a human experience. And when I am hit with inspiration, I generally attempt to follow it just like anyone would, I hope. But generally speaking, it's more of a methodical process. It's more of a practical process. And it's from an interest of design, an interest of making things that don't exist. And I'm not sure, there's a lot of assumptions that get thrown around in this area of art and music. And amongst my friends, at least, there's this assumption that everybody who pursues music is interested in art, interested in creativity. And I don't think that's true. I think people pursue music for a whole bunch of different reasons. They pursue music because they want to be part of something. They pursue music because they want to, they might lean towards narcissism. Not narcissism as a bad thing. Like, I think it's a valid perspective in humanity. I'm not going to be the person to tell you whether it's good or bad. We see it enough to tell us that it's a trait that is wildly existent across the spectrum of art and music. But I don't think it's necessarily motivated by art. I think it's like the spectacle, in the infatuation with being a spectacle, or the infatuation with being part of a spectacle. And anyhow, there's a whole bunch of different reasons why people might pursue something that we call art, but art isn't always the motivator. So for me, art is the motivator. So I just want to, distinguish that I'm not making this assumption that everybody pursues things for the same reasons, and that, or to be talking like as if I have the better way or anything like that. I have my way and I have my motivations. But yeah, my motivation is definitely from the perspective of art and design. And so a certain amount of personal expression, like expressing thoughts and ideas and angles, perspectives of reality through a medium, but also from a design perspective, where you can see these things, these architectures, I suppose, within music, with the medium is music, and there are these architectures that you hear in other works. And the hamster gets on the wheel in my head, and it's like, like, that looks really interesting. What if it was built this way instead of that way? And what if it was combined with this thing from over here in this way? And what if I took the opposite of this that defines this genre? Like, this is the pinnacle trait that defines this genre. And what if I take that and flip it 180? And so I approach music often from this sort of more design kind of thinking, looking at the architecture of it, and just with a curiosity of what ifs. What could you do with it? And that, more than anything, is like this deep drive. Sometimes I'm like, I just need to get home. Like, I'll be grocery shopping or something. I'm like, I have this idea. I need to get home and try this thing, because I have this idea of mashing these two architectures together, or completely deconstructing a thing, because I see this sort of diamond inside of this clay ball, whatever. I don't know if that's a good answer, but
I mean, I totally agree with that. Like, when you have this idea, like, there's always this time you need to put it into action. Like, I need to put it on paper. I need to record this. I need to. I totally get you. Yeah, yeah. So, among all of your musical creations, what's that one thing among all of Bunch Jams, that you can tell me that if people listen to this, they're gonna know this is the Bun. Like this is the
Oh.
holy grail of the Bun. What's that one creation? Yeah, what's that one thing that you could on the top of your mind you could think right now?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's actually difficult to think about, to be honest. Uh, but it's interesting because yeah, we don't think about ourselves like when we're making things as the artist, we don't think about the fabric of our identity uh, being entwined with the work that we do. I guess it kind of comes up in certain ways and across your career, or it presents itself to you at certain points across your career, depending on what's happening. But yeah, we don't think about it too much. And so over the last couple of years, so the popularity of what I'm doing has increased the most in the last, say, 3 years of this 10-year period. I started doing like the Bunn as a solo artist about 10 years ago. And prior to that, I did things in bands, as part of a team. And so within the last 10 years, the last 3 years is when things have really started kind of working, I guess, taking off in some way. And there's still a long way to go, but things are working. And so there's a lot more feedback. There's a lot more interactions with listeners. And because of social media, it's only in the last handful of years that I really dove into social media. Right now, I'm kind of like not taking a break, but like I've stepped outside of it. I'm like, oh, I've built this thing on social media. What is it? Because I didn't know what I was building. And that's a side story. But yeah, social media has become this major thing, and we find ourselves in the middle of it, or we don't. But like I find myself in the middle of it, and there's all this interaction, there's all this feedback, there's all this perspective that can be gained from it. Some of it positive, some of it maybe negative. I think for me, it's mostly positive. But this identity topic has come up quite a bit in the last maybe 3 years, uh, and something that I never really considered before, which is, a lot of comments about like, I I can hear this, like I can hear you every time I hear your music. I hear you, and I don't know other music that has that sound, and I'm like, so comments along those lines. But as the artist, after you hear that kind of feedback enough times, you're like, what is that? I don't even know what that is. I just do what I do.
Yeah,
and
I think
and
it's yeah. Go
no,
ahead.
go. Yeah, yeah.
Like I think that's true. Like personally, me when I hear something from an artist, I don't know. There's something coming off from their music that would make me associate. Oh, that's his music.
Yeah.
That's from him. Yeah.
And it's interesting when you hear things and you don't get that feeling. And you're like, oh, this kind of blends. Like you hear some music and it blends into the background. It blend not necessarily into the background, but it blends in with a lot of other music. And you're like, huh, interesting. And that sort of strikes me. I'm like, oh, what? It's interesting that a person would choose to make this. But then when you really think of it, you're like, they probably don't think about it. Uh, because I don't think about it. I don't know anyone who thinks about like, I'm gonna do what I do. I never sit down and be like, yeah, I'm gonna do the Bunn thing. Like I'm not sure what that is, but I have been thinking about it quite a bit in the last couple of years, maybe the last 2 or 3 years. I'm like, what is this Bunn sound? And there's certain things as a player and as a producer, I I think about it in terms of techniques. It's like I always do this, this sort of thing with the drums. I always do this sort of thing with the guitar, and there are these sort of signature techniques. So there's that part, but it seems it goes a little bit beyond that. But so I'm talking around your question like crazy, but I find it a very interesting question because there's so much to think about from an artist perspective. Because when we're listeners, only a listener, and something that I've been able to do as I got older, for the longest time when I was really into music and touring, like touring around the country and playing, I was only ever thinking as an artist, and I was listening to other music as an artist. And when I listened to music, I listened to like the guitar part and then the bass part and the drum part and like how the vocals interact and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, this is not an enjoyable way to listen to music. Like I forgot how to listen to music as just a listener. And over the last, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years, I've kind of found my way back to that. But thinking about music from this sort of granular perspective, it leads you somewhere, but I think it's the virgin listener, the listener who does not understand the difference between the drums and the guitar, that really has the full picture of like the impact of the sound and the signature of the sound. And that's the most mysterious thing. So listening to the music that way, what is the signature? Like me as the artist trying to understand, like, what is it that I do? It's very difficult. I don't really have a clear answer for you, but if I had to wrap it all up to answer your question, I'm finally coming around to it. I think my Wetlands project, WTLNDS, it's just all the vowels are missing. But I think that is sort of the culmination of all of my sounds in one project, which is interesting to me, because when I listen to, or when I think about that project, it's a project I never would have done earlier in my life because it's sort of built on certain musical principles that I was not keen on. And in approaching that, so it uses a foundation of the blues, like blues music. It doesn't really sound like the blues. At points, maybe it does. But at some point, I started playing with this idea of the blues. I'm like, I never use the blues because I don't like the blues, because all the blues I ever heard often travels a very similar road. And, I had this negative opinion of that for some reason. But I had this negative opinion, this sort of empty negative opinion of the blues, never having put myself to it, never having explored it, never having, played with it. So I'm like, I'm going to play with it. Like, what is the blues? What is it to me? What can I do something with it that is me? And that was the interesting part, because I started playing with it and it didn't sound like the blues. It still just sounded like me. I'm like, weird. And suddenly I was really interested. I'm like, I can even make the blues not really sound like the blues. And so, yeah, it's the project that takes this very ubiquitous sound, this thing that everybody's heard, that everybody's incredibly familiar with, pentatonic or blues based kind of thing. And it's still super Bunn sounding. And even I can hear it. And I'm like, I don't understand. I don't understand what I do, but there it is.
Got you. Got you. Nice, nice.
Very long
All
answer.
Yeah, yeah, no worries, but I get you. I mean, it's different when you see it from the artist side and like from us, the listener side. And
Yeah.
I totally understand when you're like thinking, yeah, what's that sound that I make them remember? I totally get it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
totally understandable. All right, so we understood your awakening as a musician when you were a kid. You had a spectacle. You went into skateboarding through it. You got into the heavy without the metal genre. You pursued through all of those.
Mhm.
You're doing what you love until now. If you had a chance to talk to aspiring artists, those who have had their awakenings as well, but they don't know how to pursue it, what would you tell them?
Uh yeah, pursue it. Like go all in.
Yeah.
Uh it like if so it's tough to say. The artist path is can be very difficult, but it's less difficult if you go all in. And I think idealism is is a problem. Is one of the things that works against you. Your own idealism. You artists are the biggest barrier in their own path. And I was the biggest barrier in my own path. I was very idealistic about how it needed to work, how it needed to unfold, and the criteria and credentials surrounding that, what the associations were, and part of that has to do with like wanting to control your story, and I think to some extent you should write your own story to, but there is a certain part of the listener, the fan, the whatever, the people on the other end, the receiving end. It's at least half of their job to do that. Um, and amongst my artist friends, we have this ongoing conversation that is very funny to us, where we all play these sorts of styles of heavier music that is just slightly on the outside of the primary genre. It's not quite punk, or it's not quite metal, or it's not quite rock. Like it's always, all of my friends do something a little bit kind of on on the outside. Uh and we'll play shows, or we'll do, people will give us feedback on what we're doing through the internet or otherwise. And they'll say, "Oh, uh I really love the way that you do this. It's so Metallica." Or they'll just pick like the biggest band in the genre that they understand, and maybe that they have limited exposure to this whole world of like subgenres and microgenres and all this kind of stuff. And um and they only know this, and that's what they use as their example. And and we find it funny. Our younger selves would have taken maybe a little bit of offense to that, or been protective of it, and going back to that writing your own story, be like, I don't want to be associated with that. But that's part of, this goes back to this, like, being your own barrier. That's part of the discovery. Like, when I first got into music, I only had access to Kiss and various mainstream artists. So my lens of looking at the world of music was based on what I knew. And it was only until I knew more that I could verbalize and communicate uh, different details, a different angle of perspective of that picture. And so artists often kind of get in their own way surrounding that, and maybe like put a barrier between them and potential fans, potential listeners, trying to control their story too tightly, instead of just do your thing, like be authentically you, like be 100% you. And being authentically you doesn't necessarily mean like being a complete bleeding heart and like here spill your guts about like every true detail of your life. I don't like, maybe that's your story, and I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm not saying that that's what you have to do. But like the parts that you are and the parts that you do share those parts 100% at maximum volume. Or maybe you're not a loudmouth, maybe you're not a loud personality, so maybe share them quietly. Whatever the case may be, whatever is 100% you, do those things. And in the end, it kind of works out. You don't have to worry about controlling your story. I think there's a difference between authoring your story, like sharing your story, allowing it to proliferate organically through your actions of being 100% you, and not worrying about how people mistake you for Metallica. They probably don't mistake you for Metallica. Nothing wrong with Metallica. They're a major band, and it's a lens that people understand. And that's what they hear, and that's what they listen to. And they're like, I understand that. And now I discovered this. And they both have distorted guitars. And I'm very animated with my speaking, and there's like saliva flying from my mouth. I apologize. I don't know if it shows up on camera, but I can see it. But yeah, people understand things the way that they understand, and they're interested. Sometimes, like I've found with my own music, people who they've never heard this kind of music before, and thanks to the internet, their very first exposure, their gateway into my music was just the internet. They just came across it, and they're like, what is this kind of music? And there's been a few people who just went crazy for it, and I'm like, whoa, slow down. But they went from Metallica, something mainstream, and that was the only comparison that they could make. And now they found you, and that's the only language they have. Oh, we got a visitor in the back there. Okay. It's my partner, Carrie. She's exiting the building. Carrie has left the building. But yeah, people have the language they have to understand things, and the experiences they have to understand things. But because of the internet now, sometimes they don't find you through a gateway. They don't find you through like a logical order of, I was listening to this, and then that led me to this, and then that led me to this. That's how things used to work. You'd hear something on the radio, and you'd go to the record store and you'd find it, and then you'd talk to the person at the record store. They're like, if you like this, maybe you might like this, and it's not on the radio. And you find that, and you're like, oh, that's way closer to what I'm looking for. Amazing. And then through that, you read the liner notes in the album, and you're like, oh, they're influenced by these bands. I'm going to check those out. And you're like, oh, that's even closer to what I'm looking for. So the sort of logical order of discovery is a little different now. There is not necessarily a logical order of discovery. People can just find you. So the worst is being a barrier, like being your own barrier to yourself, and being like, no, I'm not Metallica. Get out of here. It's like, well, if people like what they hear, they like what they hear, and they understand it through the lens that they understand it, and that's it. So, and going back to the very beginning of how we got into that tirade, I tend to just talk and talk and talk. But the the going all in. So if you're a new artist, you'll never get to that if you don't go all in. And it's hard, it's really hard to go all in. But I don't think it's the kind of thing to wet your toes on, to dip your toes in the water, to just try it out. Trying it out doesn't go anywhere. However, some people might be lucky on that. Some people might be so talented and the timing be so perfect, like a perfect storm, and they dip their toes in the water and suddenly, they're on their way. It has happened in history, but it is such a unicorn moment. Usually with most people, you hear this all the time with major artists, and they're like, yeah, people are talking about, there's all this press on this overnight success, but we've been at it for 15 years and we have 11 albums out that no one's ever heard. So being able to, the way that you author your story, the way that you get your story out there to be discovered in these ways is going all in. And when you go all in, you accept that you're crap at the beginning. You accept that you're terrible. Because most people are terrible, even if they're incredibly talented. So if they're incredibly talented, but they've never done a record before, they just don't have any experience in what it takes to make an incredible record. Not to say that I know how to make an incredible record. I know how to make the records that I make. But like when we haven't done something, we think about things in different ways. And we're like, I want to do good. I want to succeed. So I want to do the best possible thing. But if you've never done that thing before, you need to do that thing. Usually you need to do it a few times in order to get good at it. And then, so you make an incredible record. Well, now there's this huge chasm, this huge gap between, well, I have a record. Why is anyone going to hear it? And it's like, you got to span this huge gap, because records are interesting. It's like with a movie, you can have a title and a description and a thumbnail that is quite captivating and tells quite a bit of the story of like why somebody might be interested in that movie. But with music, it's a lot more ambiguous. Like the gap between a thumbnail and a title and clicking and listening to enough of the music to have an idea. Maybe they click on the first song, and the first song is like this long intro sound design, and it doesn't even get into the music. And maybe the music's incredible, but they happen to click on a track that doesn't get into the music for a little bit, and they miss it. And they're like, that band's crap. I'll never listen to that again. They don't even consciously think that. They're just like, oh, I'm not interested in that. And they move on and they never think about it again. So that kind of stuff, you don't really understand how to navigate that or whatnot until you do it a bunch of times. You make a bunch of records, then you publish a bunch of records, and you get it out and you work with the crowd. And it's usually the people who go the distance and push through all of those things to understand them and work on the mechanics of things that make any headway at all, like find success. And success could be, being able to move a bunch of units, like get a bunch of streams, sell a bunch of LPs, get a bunch of views on music videos. There's a bunch of ways that we can measure like success. Or it could be like, actually finding your way to being a prolific artist that is in the mainstream and whatever. Like the scale of success is debatable, but getting to any level of success in those ways where it's maybe self-sustaining to some degree, takes a lot of these hurdles. So get out of your way and go the distance, is my very long-winded answer.
Nice. I mean, every bit of your answer totally makes sense, because it's sometimes always ourselves who's always the first one stopping us from going all in and pursuing what we love to do.
Yeah.
And
And a lot of
there's
times it's ignorance, you know, we're just ignorant of what we're trying to do.
exactly. All right. So I think I got every part of your story that we would love to know. I mean, I had so much fun talking to you. Like,
Amazing, April.
yeah, every answer that you have is really like, oh yeah, that makes sense. What he's saying is really true. Yeah, your depth is something, and I hope you continue to create more beautiful music and continue to express your